Hello there, it's Miss Fish here coming to you from the woods, specifically the Cascades. It's quite lovely here. The water's kind of high. We've had a lot of rain recently, so I decided to wear my rain boots. It might get a little bit wild. I have an assistant here today. Last hike, I did it, but it was a little bit difficult, and the terrain here is a little bit less forgiving if I stumble. So I'm gonna need to keep my eye on the trail and on the lesson plan materials that I have today. The water's kind of excited today. It's had a lot of rain recently. This is where it really begins. Now we have a choice. We can do the lower trail or we can do the upper trail. Judging by the intensity of the rapids, I think we're gonna go for the upper trail. It seems as though Hannah was here, or at least someone who knows Hannah. Hi, Hannah. Okay, I guess it's about time to start. Okay. Wow. Lesson 1. Someone asked me about the difference between swam and swum, or ran and run. So both of those pairs are different for different reasons. So the first one, swam and swum, I have this printout of past and present participles, so we can look at the swim line specifically and see that the verb swim, a simple past version of it is swam, and a past participle version of it is swum, and then the present participle is swimming. So the difference there is just simple past and past participle. Sometimes the simple past will be the same as the past participle, like for talk, the verb is talk, simple past is talked, past participle is talked, and then present participle is talking. Cry, it's cried, crying. But so like rang and rung, swam, swum, ate, eaten, rose, risen, chased, those are the same, went, gone. That's your difference there. And then for the difference between ran and run, well, ran is a past, and the past participle could be you have run. So if you want to use run in the past, then you just be like, I have run, rather than ran. But run, saying it like just by itself would be the present tense of the word, the infinitive to run. And so that's the difference between those two. Participles can be a bit difficult sometimes, so just try to do your best. Find information online when you have questions, but I hope I answered that question helpfully. Wow. Next question. Is it okay to start a sentence with because? And short answer is yes, but be careful. The issue that a lot of people encounter, they accidentally have a sentence fragment. It's more difficult to write a complete sentence if it starts with because. So my recommendation is to just be careful with it. The reason that you've been told not to do it is probably because when people are learning to write, it just makes it a lot more difficult for them to write a complete sentence if they start it with because. Like all of these would be sentence fragments, but this one will just be a sentence fragment. This one right here is a sentence fragment. Because he woke up late. That's a sentence fragment. You need to either add another phrase to that, so like because he woke up late, he was late to work. That's a complete sentence. But just because he woke up late, that's not a complete sentence. And I got this from Grammar Girl. Great resource online. False, it's okay to start a sentence with because. You just have to make sure you're writing complete sentences and not sentence fragments. Because heads up subordinate clauses, which means if you have a clause that starts with because, you must also have a main clause in your sentence. A main clause is something that could be a complete sentence by itself. The main clause can come first or last. If it comes last, you need a comma. Fact, it's okay to start a sentence with because we love Jake the dog so much, we're sharing this GIF. So that's my answer for that one. Okay, the next topic is one that I'm very excited to cover. It's the difference between standard English and non-standard English. I mentioned this in my previous video that we were going to touch on dialectual speech. A lot of people are asking me about, like, when is it okay to use everyday language, and can you use it in formal writing? So that is what I'll be answering now. Okay, so I printed out the general definitions of both. So standard English is English that, with respect to spelling, grammar, pronunciation, and vocabulary, is substantially uniform, though not devoid of regional differences, that is well established by usage, the formal and informal speech and writing of the educated, and is widely recognized as acceptable wherever English is spoken. And then non-standard English is defined as any dialect of English other than standard English. And also, and this is where I chose this one, it is a term used disapprovingly by some non-linguists to describe bad or incorrect English. You attach some stereotypes based on the everyday type of speech. We just have less formal way of speaking, which I think that's what a lot of people were referring to with everyday speech. But then you also extend it into, like, vernaculars or dialects, ways that people speak in the region or the area. Like, for example, I think a whole new non-standard form of English has risen up from the age of the internet. We have a whole language almost, and I believe that's a form of vernacular, everyday speech or writing that has its place in informal settings, but usually in academic literature or like essay writing. It's good to avoid that kind of stuff unless you have a purpose. So, like, if you're writing a research essay on linguistics and you're talking about, I don't know, the vernacular of the mountains, people who live in the Appalachia, that's a way that some people pronounce it. I'm from the area and I say Appalachian, but that's a way that I pronounce it. Both are, I suppose, technically correct, although Appalachian certainly makes me cringe. Okay, so it is raining. So I have switched to my phone, and I didn't bring my dongle, so I can't attach my mic to my phone. So the audio quality of this might be subpar, but I'm doing my very best. So I was talking about standard and non-standard English, or so non-standard English can also be referred to as dialectual English or vernacular English. And you've got a lot of different forms. So you've got, like, the most, I'd say, the one that I studied when I took linguistics in my English undergrad. We studied African American vernacular English. Some call it Black English. I'll be referring to it as African American vernacular English, or vernacular English, Black English. And there's some things within that, like non-formal speech, that it exists throughout. It's not really like people speaking incorrect English when a whole community of people do it, and it's based in history. I'm probably going to quiet up for a little bit because I don't think you'll be able to hear me over this. Favorite spots on the trail. I love this trail. If you've not done the Cascades, I definitely recommend it. It's a short one. It's relatively easy. It's just a good time. It's beautiful. I'll wait to go into the specifics of African American vernacular English, because I printed out some charts that show better than what I can explain, like the grammatical tendencies of certain vernaculars. And I'm focusing on African American vernacular English just because that's the one I know the most. but you've also got like Chicano English or Mexican American vernacular English, indigenous peoples. There's a vernacular way of, it basically combines like the original language in like how it moves, so maybe like the rhythmic element of African languages, and I guess I can go into a history lesson. African people, when they were brought over here in the slave trade, they were basically kept in plantations where they didn't all speak the same language. Ooh, we got some flooding here. That's okay. I got boots. Ooh. So they were intentionally kept from people who spoke the same language as them, because even though that like people were brought over from Africa, there were different languages within Africa. Obviously, it's a huge continent, and so people from different African countries would be kept together on a plantation, basically so that they couldn't really communicate. And I mean, we all know that black people didn't get education. They weren't taught how to read or how to write. So basically they were just people thrown into a new country with a different language, and they had people who spoke similar languages to them in that they had a rhythmic quality to them. There were a lot more gestures, like certain ways that they pronounced their words. And so then when they basically had to create their own language based off of the qualities that was similar in their African languages, and then blend it with the language that they were hearing spoken around them. So it's a blending of like African language elements with the English language. And obviously they couldn't really learn correct English because, well, they weren't taught correct English. It wasn't for like centuries that they were actually taught standard English. So to discredit that language is like incorrect, or basically say that it shouldn't exist anymore. I mean, that's just saying like a whole period of history just needs to go away, or something beautiful that came out of a dark time in history. Language preserves culture, preserves heritage. So, oh, nice. There's the waterfall. And now it's getting loud. All right, I'm gonna end this recording because I don't have my mic. I got boots. This don't matter to me. I'd say that was a vernacular way of speaking. We got it. Oh, you don't got it. Okay. Remember how I told you the trail was probably flooding? There it is. Wear waterproof shoes when you do the Cascades, because there's a waterfall. You can do it. You can do it. Here. Do you mind if I go ahead? Yeah, banjo, why? You got it. Are your shoes soggy?
What?
Are your shoes soggy?
No.
Nice. Okay, well here it is. Here is the big deal here. I barely even got through any of my questions. I'm gonna have to do a lot more when we get back down. We've got a little observing thing here. And please, do not climb up there. So many people have gotten injured or killed here. Please be careful. Read the signs. It says do not climb the falls. And that is for a reason, because people get hurt here. Nice. Really. Look at this good citizen here. Taking care of our planet as he should. I wish the person who ate that had done that, but whatever. We're here, we can pick it up. Look at you, Banjo! Ow, he's looking at it. Fragile ecosystem, remain on trail. That's an important topic. Leave no trace. Walk on durable surfaces. When you go on hikes, that doesn't mean that you can do whatever the heck you want. There's a trail for a reason. Walk on it, because if you step off the path, you might mess up something. Like the butterfly effect. Ray Bradbury, The Sound of Thunder. Goodbye. Now we are continuing onward. Still kind of wet. It's partially raining, but it also just might be, all that going on over there. So other camera might come out in a bit, but not yet. So again, I apologize for the low quality of this footage. Ooh, looks like we've got another fun trek ahead of us. I believe these are rhododendron. I'm not the best at that one, so yeah, I think I'm gonna go with rhododendron. Boots, don't care. As far as using everyday speech, vernacular, dialect in essays or academic writing, generally, no, unless you're doing it for a purpose. So, like if you're writing a creative piece that takes place in a specific region, say it takes place in Georgia or Boston, you can use the language and the dialogue in there to help people understand where your setting is. For example, of Mice and Men uses a lot of dialectical speech. Their Eyes Are Watching God, that uses some African American vernacular English. Life for Me Ain't Been No Crystal Stair is another one. Ooh. All right, to the parking lot. That's to the falls. And then we got Conservancy Trail. Trying to go on another hike?
Not today.
That's what I say every time I look at that trail. Someday. So back onto standard and non-standard English. Now, I think next I should cover code switching. So code switching is basically where you switch from one code or language to another, or one dialect to another. So you can use code switching to refer to someone who is fluent in another language and might jump in between languages while they're speaking. I have some family from Romania, and they do this quite a bit. I'll hear them talking, and for a while I have no idea what they're saying, but then all of a sudden they switch to English, or like a lot of times, like children of immigrants, like their parents will speak the native language more, and the kids will be familiar with the language and be able to talk with it, but a lot of times they'll be asked a question in their native language and then they will respond in English. That's another example of code switching. But then when you're talking about within the same language, code switching can also refer to switching from an informal to a formal type of speech, or switching from non-standard English to standard English. And this is, again, most notably, I studied this with African American vernacular English. So like people who speak the vernacular at home come to school, and then I have teachers are telling them that what they're doing is wrong, or like that it seems less intellectual or whatever. So then they code switch into standard English so that they can sound more academic, so they sound more standard, and leave like the community and cultural speech at home. And I certainly do this to a lesser degree. I'm born and raised in Southwest Virginia, and I tend to have a little bit of a southern drawl sometimes. I've had people, especially when I went to college at Virginia Tech, I had a lot of people comment on the way that I spoke. So like I had someone tell me that I would frustrate them sometimes because I take a long time to say something, which is funny because I thought my dad was the one who takes forever to say anything, but I guess I do too, because I've been talking about standard, non-standard English for a while now. But whenever I'm in like the more academic sphere, I try to switch from my more southern way of speaking into a more academic way of speaking, just because the stereotypes that people associate with southern accents isn't something that I always want associated with me when I'm like being a professional or being a student, being an academic. So I still use y'all pretty much all the time, because I think that's becoming something that even people who aren't from the South say, just because it's easier than saying you all. But I try to switch out of it just because I don't want people to assume like, oh, she's a redneck, she's a hillbilly, she doesn't know anything because she's got a southern accent. I just try to avoid it by switching out of my informal way of speaking, which would be like Appalachian or mountain vernacular, into a more formal and academic standard English. But when I'm at home with my family, or if I'm talking to my dad, a lot of times like people in my classes, they'll hear me have a conversation with my dad and they'll be like, man, I had no idea you talked like that, or like that your family talked like that. I'm like, yeah, because I code switch. I make it to where you can't really determine where I'm from. I like to say y'all, I like to say ain't, don't, got, no, you got your double negatives, and just the way you pronounce things as well can associate with the vernacular. So anyway, that's code switching. And there's a picture of it in my notebook. It's starting to clear up on rain, so I might pull my notebook out in a minute just so I can stop going on and on and on about this subject, when the original question was just simply, can you use everyday speech in writing? And my answer is, well, define what everyday speech is, because if you're talking about vernacular and dialect, it has its place sometimes, but not always.
It's one of the frameworks I used in my prelim, but discourse refers to a certain community's way of speaking, behaving, how they establish order, how they use tools, how they use signs, etc. And based on the way that someone displays certain elements of the community's discourse, they can either affiliate themselves or choose not to in certain social situations. So there was a study done in 2004 of high school science students, some of whom were displaying sort of science discourse that is using scientific terminology in the subject, whereas some were actively fighting it. They just didn't want to take on the scientific words. So students were able to display competence in science discourse. They could use the words, they could speak clearly about science topics, but they chose not to in certain social circumstances. That is, if they were around a certain group of people, they might pretend that they don't know how to speak in scientific terms. They choose not to act like they like science or they associate with it, because they feel like that is a part of their identity that they don't want to display to that peer group. And why that is sort of going to depend on the individual. Some people have personas or faces that they put forward for certain groups that, say, taking on a scientific discourse would betray. If you're in a social group where academics are viewed as uncool, even if you're really good at science and you really like it, you might not put forth that discourse, that behavior, that language. It's called discursive identity, because if you identify with a community, you're more likely to use elements of its discourse in some or all social situations than someone who has a weak discursive identity.
That's PhD candidate almost Benjamin Goldschneider coming to you live from the scientific community. Okay, so this is like the information that I was meaning to cover, but since it was raining I put this away, and then I ended up talking forever. So examples of like non-standard English, they ain't getting anything, they haven't got anything would be a standard way of saying that statement. And I love the player what scored versus standard would be I love the player who scored. Non-standard, we was there yesterday. Standard would be we were there yesterday. Non-standard, pass me them books. Standard would be pass me those books. Non-standard, I played good. Standard would be I played well. So in all those statements we have a general understanding of what's being said, even if that's not the vernacular that we speak or that we're most familiar with. And then as far as like the specifics of African American vernacular English, because again that's the one that I am most familiar with, in the past tense you've got a few different ways of approaching that. So examples of like the past tense African American vernacular English would be I been bought it, I done buy it, I did buy it, I do buy it, I be buying it. Ooh, the B one. We're gonna get more on that one in a second. Present, oh, I be buying it. Immediate, I'ma buy it, I'ma buy it, I gonna buy it. So those are also non-formal, but we can recognize what it is. We can generally understand what's being said. So then, and I mentioned the like be there being specifically interesting. So in African American vernacular English, and this extends to other vernacular English, there's this thing called the habitual be. And the habitual be, it's what it means. It's the word be used to describe something that is habitual or like happens often, happens a lot, rather than something that's happening now. So like a correct statement in African vernacular English would be I be hiking, as in I hike all the time. I love hiking. Whereas if I say I be hiking right now, I mean I am hiking right now, but that's not really the habitual be, and that would technically be like incorrect in the informal language or informal dialect of African American vernacular English. And then some other examples here. We've got like the pronunciation, the variation of ask and ax. So I ask them a question. That's a thing that's really throughout the African American vernacular English, which is a thing that people get kind of heated about sometimes, or they kind of use jokingly, but it's a real thing. I studied it as a linguist. So next, the ing or in variation. So he's running fast rather than he's running fast. And that's something that is also similar in like Southern vernacular speech. Are vocalization or deletion. So this occurs in words such as for, father, or car. So you delete it. So like father, car, full. Like you don't say the R. That would be deletion. And that's something, it's raining again. I don't know if you can see it on my page. I'll try to get through this. L vocalization or deletion. So in words such as school, cool, or people. So school, cool, people. I don't know how to say that one. Someone who actually speaks the dialect will have to help me with that one. final consonant reduction in clusters. So find as in fine, hand as in hand. Single final consonant absent, so five and fine as fi. So you take out the middle of the word. Initial th as d, final th as d, t, s, z, f, or v. So they as day, with as with as wit. Final consonant can be devoiced, so bad as bat. It's also similar, there's a specific example of that in a song by Beyonce. I can't remember the name of the song, but she says surfboard instead of surfboard, and that is an example of that specific quality of African American vernacular English. Then you've got isn't as idn't, wasn't as wouldn't. That would be s as d before in. So idn't, wasn't as wouldn't. Glide, J as consonant, so computer as computer, Houston as Houston. And then we've got T as in surcluster, so stream as scream. And then syllable stress can shift from second to first syllable, so police instead of police, and umbrella instead of umbrella. That's just putting the stress on the word in a different part. There's a lot of academia out there if you're interested in pursuing this subject further. I am by no means an expert, but I did get an introduction to it in my undergraduate studies as an English major with a linguistics course that I took, and it was super interesting. Language is just spectacular. That's what I love about it. And I definitely love language and how it exists truly in the world, how people speak. It's really special to me, so I think it's really important to preserve these vernaculars and use them where they fit best. Alright, now we get to dive into the fun subject of MLA format. So a few people ask me how to do it properly, why we use it. It's just one of the formats you use. Usually use it more with like literary things. Other like academic communities tend to lean towards other citation things, so like APA or Chicago. There's a variety of different ways to do it, but in English class we use MLA, so that's what I'm going to be talking about. So the first thing about MLA, you have 1-inch margins, and it's double space, 12-point font. Can use Times New Roman, but I've had English professors tell me that they hate Times New Roman because it's all they ever see. I particularly love Book Antiqua and Garamond. So 1-inch margins, double space, Times New Roman 12. You can do a title page instead of a heading, but there aren't really specific guidelines on the title page. But as far as the heading, that's usually what I'm looking for. I had all of my papers like this just because it's become a habit. So you start with your name, and then you do like a space, not like you just break the line. You don't have additional spaces anywhere in the page. Then you put your instructor's name of the class, and then the date, and the order that you put it is the day, then the month, and then the year. So today would be 20 March 2020, the day that Animal Crossing came out. Up at the top you have a header that has your last name and the page number, and then you have a line break, no additional spaces. You go straight into the title of whatever piece you're writing, and then you indent your line, and you start with a hook, introduction, blah, 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 and then your thesis is usually at the end of your introduction paragraph. Then you go into your next one, indent again, and I recommend using a transitional phrase here, or like hit the ground running, dive straight into your first topic. Then I started talking about how to properly cite things. So one thing that I see a lot of people struggle with is how to include other sources, like how to introduce a quote or something. So they just throw it in there without any introduction. And I'd recommend trying to use some leading phrases. So like this theme is exemplified in the following quote, important quote, and then, oh my gosh, please. please get this right. Internal citation, you have your quotes, no period in the quote. Then you have a source, and then you put the period outside of the quote. I think everyone's struggling with it. I understand it's kind of difficult, and then block quotes throw it off because it's different in those. And then after you use a quote, don't just leave it hanging. You need to actually explain like some analysis or explain the importance of the quote. So first of all, your works cited. It's called works cited, not sources or bibliography in MLA format. You list your sources in alphabetical order, and you use hanging indent, and the order of it is author's last name, first name, title of source, title of book or journal, other contributors, version or numbers, publication or publisher, publication date, location. If there are two authors, you list them as the author does, and if there are multiple authors, then you just list the first one and then you add et al. That's just a little Latin phrase. I don't know what it means, but that's what you're supposed to do when there are multiple people. The works cited, you got your hanging there. It's in alphabetical order. When you're creating a citation, that's the order you use. You can use generators online, or a lot of time like databases will already have the citation created for you on the website that you access the source. So I always, when I'm looking at a source, the first thing I look for is if it has a citation there, and I go ahead and copy and paste it into wherever I'm working, just so I don't lose it, so I don't have to figure it out later and find all this stuff. Someone's already done it for me. It's important to also talk about block quotes when we're talking about MLA. A block quote is, I think it's like 40 words or more than 3 lines, so anything that's 4 lines or more, you need to block quote it. Different people say different things. So a block quote, again, you need to introduce it just like a regular quote. So you have like your paragraph, indentation, you talk about something, then you do a leading phrase or introduce the concept, and then you can use a colon here. That's a great use of a colon. We've talked about those previously in one of my other videos. It could be like, this is exemplified in the following quote, colon, and then you don't have any quotations in the block quote unless like the block quote itself has quotations within it. So you don't have quotations, you indent the whole thing. Long quotes are called block quotes. They are indented and do not include quotation marks unless the text itself has quotation marks. The citation is different. So notice the period comes at the end of the statement, then we have the source just like in a hanging parentheses there. And then, and this is very important, after your block quote, you need to talk about it. Just a few sentences, like analyzing like why that's important, whatever, analysis and reflection here. So as you can see, it's like raining now, so I'm gonna need to end this footage. We'll have to get more done later, but I hope that I made that uninteresting topic at least a little bit interesting with this beautiful scenery that we've got.
Hello everyone, it's Ben. We are on the road back from our hike. So English isn't my specialty. I was trained in engineering, but I do a lot of reading and writing of academic literature for my research. So I figured I could pitch in a little bit. She was asked how to analyze a piece without understanding that said piece, the themes behind it, some part of it, if they just don't kind of get it. And first off, I want to say that's totally understandable. That happens a lot, even to me now.
Same.
Yeah, I mean, it never goes away that sometimes there will be pieces of writing that you just don't get. They don't click, they don't make sense right away, and that's totally fine. So in dealing with the analysis of those, if you're asked to write about, say, themes or the use of language or the structure of the work or whatever, then you will have to focus on those things because that's what the assignment asks you to do. But in general, my recommendation here is to focus on the parts of the piece that you do understand. If you find the author's use of language to be particularly interesting, maybe focus on that. If you can't find any good themes emerging from the text, that's okay. Focus on, I don't know, something else.
Narrative structure.
There it is, narrative structure. Ultimately, your analysis doesn't necessarily have to go into great depth of every single piece of the work. In fact, I'd say that might overload your writing. But in many cases, you'll have the freedom to pick and choose sort of the elements that resonate most, that emerge to you and make the most sense. So in general, don't sweat the small stuff. If you can't get every single piece that you've been instructed for, that's okay. Just put your energy where it's going to be best used.